Hello, and welcome to 10 Minutes On, a podcast from the Joint Public Issues Team. My name's Sienna. I'm a Joint Public Issues Team intern. Joining me today is Bevan Powell. Amongst other things, Bevan works for the Methodist Connexional as Director for Inclusion. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Could you just begin by introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, what you did before you became Director of Inclusion, and also for those of us who don't know what it is to be Director for Inclusion for the Methodist Church or Connectional. Can you just explain a little bit about what that means?
Well, really great to be here, Sienna. I'll start with my current role as Director for Inclusion and what that actually means. So I think it's what it says on the tin. I look at all the issues of inclusion and equality throughout the entire connectional church and helping the church to achieve its aspiration to become a truly inclusive church where all are welcomed. As you will be aware, we have a strategy, Justice, Dignity and Solidarity, which really tries to pull all of our aspirations together under our diversity and inclusion, equity, etc., through a number of recommendations, many of which have been implemented. So many of your listeners would have undergone the EDI mandatory training. They would have come across the equality impact assessments, our inclusive language guide, etc. But all of this is to help with discipleship. It's to help with the mission of the church. So these strategies shouldn't be seen in isolation. They should be seen as tools to help us in our discipleship.
I'm aware that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but also think it's really clear that there's a lot that's being done within the Methodist Church, which is really exciting around this. Why did you get prompted to get involved in local politics?
I think there's two things. One, my faith that I think demands, that we fight for justice. I'm a Methodist, and at the heart of being a Methodist is that we are a justice-seeking church. But my experience in the police and the Black Police Association demonstrated to me that change and societal change, big picture change, comes through voting. It comes through politics and government and local government. And so I wanted to continue being an advocate for change, but not just being an advocate for change. I wanted to be an architect of change as well. And I wanted to support my local community that I've grown up in, folks that I've been to school with and support their parents, grandparents, etc. I just felt a calling to drive that change. And just to give an example, in North Kensington, perhaps sometimes we don't see politics linked to life expectancy, but in North Kensington, men have a 15-year shorter life expectancy than men in the south of the borough. Women have a 12-year shorter life expectancy. And that's been like that for decades. Now, that's an issue around health and adult social care. And that's definitely about politics. And it's definitely a disparity that I wanted to see eradicated and a disparity that I wanted focus on because it had been like that for so long. So really, it was trying to ensure that the community that my family was a part of or is a part of, and friends and just folks in the neighborhood, that I was somehow able to make a difference to their lives through representing them in our local council.
That's a shocking statistic.
I think, you see, sometimes these statistics are seen in isolation rather than seeing that, yes, they are part of, a number of social determinants that drive that, but also political will can change that. And that's why it's so important that we vote, irrespective of where we find ourselves. Politics influences every single person's life. Whether it's about, waiting for an operation or trying to get affordable housing, or whether it's issue about community safety or climate change. I can understand the disenchantment that exists amongst, some individuals, but the only way to bring about change is through your vote. And so I'd urge everyone listening, ensure that, you encourage others to vote, and obviously you vote yourself.
I think for many people, it can feel like a vote's a really small thing to do and actually doesn't make a difference. But I really share your belief that actually politicians they have an vested interest in listening to the people who elect them, and we get to cast a vote for the future that we want, and the political leaders that we want, and the character of politics that we want. And even though it's one small way amongst many other ways we can be involved in politics, it's really important. So I definitely share that belief. Before the podcast, we were talking about the work that you're doing as deputy chair for a charity who provides day centre services for older people from Asia, the Caribbean, and Africa. I'd be really interested to hear a little bit about kind of your reflections on politics and from the perspective of that particular community.
When we look at older people in our communities, particularly Black and brown people, that there are huge health inequalities. People from those communities, as they get older, will suffer disproportionately from a number of chronic diseases, hypertension, heart disease, etc., diabetes, disproportionately impacted by dementia. And a lot of the times, these conditions are exacerbated by the fact that individuals will present almost too late. And so some of that is around trust and confidence with some of our public services. And so there's a real need to really drive trust and confidence and to be proactive in reaching out to, local communities, Black and brown communities, but also, communities where there are issues in terms of, socioeconomic conditions. We know if you live in an area that's described as, in a deprived area, there are going to be issues around education, access to education, access to hospitals and GPs, access around schooling, etc., issues around crime and antisocial behaviour. I don't want to stereotype, but these are the factors that can impact more communities where there are less resources. So a lot of this can be addressed through local politics, but more importantly, as we're coming up to a general election, through party political, voting and voting for a party that you believe will represent your views or the views of your community. Now, we spoke about apathy, but the only way for change is by ensuring your voice is heard or the voices of your community are heard.
I love that idea of not just voting voting to make sure that your views are being heard, but actually voting for the views of your community. And churches actually, and people I think who are involved in faith communities, are often connected to very different communities through midweek groups like food banks, etc. And so thinking about the whole breadth of who the church is engaging with is such an interesting, like a unique perspective in some ways that we as Christians can take into the voting booth. Yeah, before we wrap up, I would love to just hear what your hope is for how churches, for how people who are following Jesus might engage with this election, and maybe if you think there's anything distinctive that the church has to offer in this election, what that might look like.
I think the most distinctive aspect is that we believe that we're all made in the image of God. And if that's one of the pillars of our faith, then leading on from that is about equity to services, to housing, reducing poverty, all of these various aspects of society, and just the fact that we want all people to flourish. We talk about welcoming church, and that we want to have a church where all are welcome, and all are treated fairly and with equity. But we also want that in terms of broader society, that all have, access to good quality healthcare, that all have access to affordable housing, that our public services meet the needs of our congregations and members of our community, broader community, that, in terms of education, that every child receives the best possible education. So it's about all of these things that impact our lives from cradle, to death. A lot of that is driven by the services that are provided in terms of public services. So I hope that all members of the church will vote, will encourage family members who perhaps might be fed up, feeling a bit apathetic, that it's important. It's important that we all vote, and ensuring that any members of our community or families that haven't got ID at the moment, that's sorted out. Because for the first time in our electoral process, you will need voter ID.
I love what you're talking about, how actually as Christians we have this like perspective of valuing every life, and how actually we as Christians want to seek the flourishing or the like fullness of life of all people. I think that's a lovely note to end on. And if I can just like kind of link back to something you said earlier, I love how you talked about how your calling felt like to be an advocate for change, but more than that, to be an architect of change, and how actually by being involved in the political process, we can be part of being architects for change. So Bevan, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been really wonderful hearing from your experience as we think about going into the election, as we think about how and why we vote. For listeners, a couple of key bits of information. If you're wanting to help your church get more involved in voter registration, or if you're interested in specific issues, check out JPIT's election website, which is jpit.uk/elections. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it around. Thank you so much for listening. And once again, Bevan, thank you so much for being with us today.